Walk into any big box firearms retailer in America tonight. Drop $3,000 on the latest Magnum hunting rifle with its ceramic-coated bolt, its carbon-wrapped barrel, and its self-correcting ballistic optic. Now watch where the salesman's eye drifts. Over to the bottom shelf, to that little orange brick of .22 long rifle. $200 for the rifle, $8 a box for the ammunition. A plinker. A kid's gun, a pellet rifle with pretensions. That condescending smirk is the sound of an industry that has spent 40 years burying the most efficient, most mathematically demanding, and most quietly lethal cartridge ever put into mass production on this continent. Your grandfather never paid $3,000 for a hunting rifle. Your great-grandfather never needed a muzzle brake, a titanium bipod, and a $700 scope to put venison in a cold cellar. They reached for a lever action or a single-shot rimfire, paid a nickel a cartridge, and they fed their families through 2 world wars and a Great Depression with that single caliber. In the archives of the Boone and Crockett Club, the Hunting Conservation Society founded in 1887 by Theodore Roosevelt himself, there are kill records the modern industry does not want on the podcast circuit. Apex predators dropped at short range with single-shot .22 rimfire rifles, 1,000-pound grizzlies anchored with a single 29-grain lead bullet, traveling a modest 1,240 feet per second, generating less than 100 foot-pounds of muzzle energy. For comparison, a .300 Winchester Magnum generates over 4,000 foot-pounds. The physics should be impossible, and yet the skulls sit measured, notarized, and filed in the same institution that validates every trophy on every hunting lodge wall in North America. This is not anecdote. This is forensic record, and what it tells the disciplined rifleman is simple. Surgical precision, anatomical geometry. In the world of centerfire firearms, muzzle energy is treated as the sole metric of lethality. A 5.56 NATO round delivers over 1,200 foot-pounds of energy to the target, fragmenting violently and carving a temporary wound cavity the diameter of a coffee can. Against that number, a .22 long rifle, producing a meager 100 to 150 foot-pounds at the muzzle, should be combat irrelevant. It is not, and the emergency rooms of every major urban trauma center in the United States can testify to that. The late Dr. Martin Fackler, the surgeon who founded the United States Army Wound Ballistics Laboratory at the Presidio and later the International Wound Ballistics Association, spent 3 decades documenting the terminal behavior of handgun and rifle cartridges in calibrated ordnance gelatin. Fackler's published findings on the .22 long rifle stunned the defensive firearms community. The round, he demonstrated, possesses a terminal lethality wildly disproportionate to its energy figure, a phenomenon forensic pathologists began calling the assassin's paradox. The physics are elegant and brutal. Because the .22 long rifle projectile is slow, often subsonic, and incredibly light, typically 32 to 40 grains, it possesses extremely low sectional density. When it strikes a medium, denser than air, like human soft tissue, it is inherently unstable. Unlike a high-velocity full metal jacket round that drills a clean channel straight through the target, the .22 round begins yawing and tumbling the instant it enters flesh. That tumble maximizes surface area, tearing a permanent wound channel vastly disproportionate to its .22-inch bore diameter. The true nightmare, documented by forensic pathologist Dr. Vincent DiMaio in his definitive medical textbook, Gunshot Wounds, the reference work sitting on the shelf of every medical examiner's office in the United States, is what happens when the bullet encounters bone. Lacking the kinetic energy to cleanly exit the ribcage or the skull from the inside, the .22 round deflects. It begins pinballing inside the thoracic cavity, changing direction by 90 degrees, shredding the aorta, the lungs, and the cardiac tissue along a chaotic internal ricochet path. DiMaio's autopsy records detail countless cases where a single .22 long rifle entry wound produced 3, 4, 5 separate organ penetrations, all from one bullet. Surgeons cannot track it, they cannot always extract it, and the victim rarely survives long enough to reach the operating table. That is why the .22 long rifle, the pellet gun of the big box counter, has been the caliber of choice for professional assassins, Cold War intelligence agencies, and organized crime for the better part of a century. Do not mistake a low-energy figure for a lack of lethality. The industry profits from that confusion. The science refuses it. Walk into any mid-range precision rifle retailer and the salesman will steer the buyer toward a 24 or 26-inch stainless target barrel, marked up $300 over the 16-inch configuration. The pitch is a century old. Longer barrel equals higher velocity equals flatter trajectory equals greater accuracy. For center-fire magnums burning 40, 60, 80 grains of slow propellant, that pitch holds. For the .22 long rifle, it is a lie that robs the shooter of both money and performance. Major General Julian S. Hatcher, the United States Army Ordnance Officer whose 1947 volume Hatcher's Notebook remains the single most cited work in American ballistics history, dissected this misconception on a laboratory chronograph decades before the current magnum craze existed. The .22 long rifle cartridge burns a very small charge of extremely fast propellant. That powder, Hatcher documented, is fully combusted within the first 13 to 15 inches of bore travel. Every additional inch of barrel after that point is a liability, not an asset. The physics are unforgiving. Once peak chamber pressure has passed and the expanding gas column begins to cool, the only remaining force acting on the bullet is friction against a rifling. The friction equation, F sub F equals mu times N, predicts a deceleration that continues for as long as the bullet remains in contact with the bore. A 24-inch barrel does not accelerate a .22 long rifle bullet. It actively breaks it. Modern chronograph studies, conducted by Harold Vaughn, the Sandia National Laboratory's ballistics engineer whose book Rifle Accuracy Facts remains the gold standard of quantitative rifle research, confirm Hatcher's findings with laser precision. The velocity sweet spot for a .22 long rifle projectile lies between 16 and 18 inches of barrel. Past 18 inches, average velocity drops measurably, and standard deviation begins to open up. Every inch of additional steel is aerodynamic dead weight and ballistic drag. What the industry buried is this. The shooter who spent an extra $300 on a 24-inch match barrel paid a premium for a component that is actively stealing velocity from every shot. A 16-inch suppressor-ready configuration, shorter, lighter, quieter, cheaper, produces the highest average velocity and the tightest standard deviations in every controlled test. The marketing department sold the length. The chronograph disagreed. The loudest cartridges on the rimfire shelf carry the flashiest labels: CCI Stinger, Aguila Interceptor, Federal Punch. Advertised muzzle velocities of 1,600 to 1,700 feet per second. $1.50 more per 50-round box than standard velocity. The implicit promise is obvious. More speed equals more range equals better groups at 100 yards. Walk onto the firing line at any serious NRL 22 competition or any Olympic small-bore match and watch what the top 1% of rimfire shooters actually load into their chambers. They do not touch hypervelocity. They shoot standard velocity, roughly 1,050 to 1,070 feet per second, or deliberately subsonic loads at 1,000 feet per second flat. The difference in their group sizes at 100 yards is not marginal. It is catastrophic. The explanation comes from the late Harold Vaughn again, whose chronograph and Doppler radar work on supersonic to subsonic transition remains the most rigorous ever published outside a classified military environment. When any bullet crosses the sound barrier, approximately 1,125 feet per second at sea level, depending on temperature and humidity, it generates a supersonic shock cone. Crossing that barrier in flight disrupts the bullet's center of pressure relative to its center of gravity. The projectile yaws, wobbles, and deviates unpredictably. The .22 long rifle carries a terrible ballistic coefficient. It bleeds velocity fast. A hypervelocity round leaves the muzzle supersonic, but somewhere between 50 and 75 yards downrange, it decelerates through the transonic barrier. At that exact transition point, the bullet undergoes violent aerodynamic buffeting. Group sizes triple. Consistency collapses. The modern precision rimfire community, led in published research by applied ballistician Bryan Litz, founder of Applied Ballistics LLC and chief ballistician for Berger Bullets, has mathematically demonstrated that a subsonic load, which never crosses the transonic zone because it never enters supersonic flight, delivers consistently tighter groups at every range past 50 yards. There is a second mechanical cost. Hypervelocity cartridges like the CCI Stinger achieve their advertised speeds by extending the brass case by approximately 1/100,000ths of an inch, allowing more propellant volume. Force that longer case into a tight, match-grade chamber, the kind found on any Anschutz, Voodoo, or high-end custom bolt rifle, and the projectile is jammed directly into the rifling before ignition. Pressure spikes. Extractors shear. Breech faces pit. The $1.50 saved per box on 50 rounds becomes a $600 gunsmithing bill 6 months later. What the industry buried is that hypervelocity is a marketing optimization for a problem that does not exist at the distances most rimfire shooters actually engage. In centerfire defensive calibers, 9mm Luger, .40 S&W, .45 ACP, the hollow point is doctrine. Every major law enforcement agency in the United States, every credentialed defensive instructor from Colonel Jeff Cooper's Gunsight Academy to the modern federal training centers teaches the hollow point as the civilian and duty standard. The round mushrooms on impact, dumps its energy into the threat, and minimizes overpenetration. Transfer that doctrine to the .22 long rifle, and the math breaks. Dr. Martin Fackler's gelatin work documented the exact mechanism. A hollow point cavity requires significant hydraulic pressure to peel open and mushroom properly. That hydraulic pressure is a function of velocity, and the .22 long rifle simply does not generate enough of it. At muzzle, a hollow point .22 may expand inconsistently in ideal gelatin. At 50 yards, where velocity has dropped below the critical threshold, expansion becomes a coin flip. At 100 yards, it effectively ceases. Two failure modes dominate. The hollow point fails to expand at all, and the projectile behaves like an inferior solid, carrying worse aerodynamic properties than a round nose and less penetration depth than a proper solid profile. Or the hollow point expands prematurely upon contact with a tough outer structure, a shoulder blade, a rib, a scapular ridge, dumping its already limited energy into surface tissue and producing a shallow, non-lethal wound that fails to reach the vital organs. Dr. Vincent DiMaio's forensic archive confirms the same pattern from the other side of the table. The .22 long rifle injuries that produce lethal outcomes overwhelmingly involve deep, penetrating, solid profile rounds. Shallow hollow point wounds tend to produce survivors, often ugly, infected, disabled survivors, but survivors. For any application where the .22 long rifle must actually work, small game harvest, wilderness food procurement, predator defense at close range, the disciplined choice is the 36 to 40 grain solid lead round nose. It tracks straight, it penetrates deep, it drives into cardiac and central nervous system tissue with a consistency a lighter weight hollow point cannot match. The industry sells expansion because expansion sells in centerfire. The .22 long rifle is not centerfire. The data says to stop pretending that it is. Now comes the controversy the modern tactical market refuses to print. The AR-22 conversion kit sector is booming. Dedicated semi-automatic rimfires, the Ruger 1022, the S&W M&P 1522, the CMMG Bravo, dominate rimfire sales charts and social media feeds. They are phenomenal trigger time multipliers for an AR-15 shooter who wants cheap practice. Drag any of them into a sustained, field-grade operational scenario without a cleaning kit, and their Achilles heel surfaces within 300 rounds. The .22 long rifle is, by a margin no serious manufacturer disputes, the filthiest cartridge currently in mass production. The filth is not a quality defect. It is a consequence of a 19th century heel-based projectile design that the industry has never re-engineered, because re-engineering would break backwards compatibility with every rimfire rifle ever built. Philip Sharp, the firearms researcher whose 1937 volume Complete Guide to Handloading remains the foundational text of American cartridge engineering, documented the problem in detail. A heel-based projectile, unlike a modern bottleneck cartridge, seats its bullet at the same diameter as the brass case. There is no internal case neck to hide lubricant inside. Instead, a sticky wax or grease, the same compound that smells faintly like crayon when a fresh box of .22 is opened, is smeared over the entire exterior of the exposed lead projectile to prevent the bore from leading up. That exposed wax magnetizes pocket lint, sand, and airborne grit. When the round detonates, the wax vaporizes and mixes with unburned propellant, producing a sticky carbon sludge that coats every moving surface inside the receiver. Most semi-automatic rimfires operate on straight blowback. The round's rearward gas pressure alone drives the bolt backward against a spring. That system blasts the carbon sludge directly into the bolt raceway, into the extractor channel, into the firing pin tunnel. Within a few hundred rounds, mechanical drag increases to the point that the bolt slows, failures to extract begin, the dreaded stovepipe, and failures to feed follow. Load a subsonic round into a fouled semi-auto, and the action will not cycle at all. Manual actions do not care. A bolt action, a lever action, or a pump rimfire operates on human horsepower alone. No gas system, no blowback, no cycling reliance on cartridge pressure. The legendary Colonel Townsend Whalen, the American rifleman whose half-century of published hunting and marksmanship writing shaped 20th century sporting doctrine, hunted his entire life with bolt-action and lever-action rifles for precisely this reason. Whalen's famous dictum that only accurate rifles are interesting carried a quieter companion rule. Only reliable rifles put meat on the table. The modern survivalist trade-off is unchanged. Rapid follow-up shots and ease of practice come from the semi-automatic, at the cost of a rigorous cleaning schedule. Unconditional, omnivorous reliability across every ammunition profile, from subsonic primer-only CB caps to hypervelocity, comes from the manual action, at the cost of manual cycling speed. The industry sells semi-autos because semi-autos move volume. The discipline of the lineage has always favored the manual lever. The most hated sound in rimfire shooting is the click where a bang should be, the dud round, the failure to fire. Almost every shooter who encounters it blames the rifle. The firing pin is worn, the spring is weak, The bolt is out of spec. In a very small percentage of cases, that diagnosis is correct. In the overwhelming majority of cases, it is not. The failure is baked into the 19th century engineering of the rimfire cartridge itself, and no amount of gunsmithing will eliminate it. I need to be honest with you, brother. Every rimfire shooter, every single one, who has trusted a .22 long rifle to fire on command has at some point staked something real on a round that did not go off. A squirrel in the garden, a coyote in the henhouse, a coup de grace on a wounded deer that a larger caliber had already put down. That click is a brutal teacher, and the industry does not like talking about why it happens. Major General Julian Hatcher laid out the mechanics in Hatcher's notebook. A centerfire cartridge carries its priming compound in a separate precision cup, an independent anvil and primer assembly pressed into the center of the casehead. The firing pin strikes the center, the anvil crushes the compound, ignition is nearly guaranteed. Rimfire is a different species of engineering entirely. In rimfire manufacturing, a process detailed in Philip Sharp's hand-loading research and refined by every ammunition maker from CCI to Ely, the priming compound is a wet paste. It is measured in microliters and dropped into the bottom of the thin brass case. The case is then spun at high RPM in an industrial centrifuge, using centripetal force to sling the wet paste outward into the hollow rim. That process is, by the admission of the engineers who designed it, statistically imperfect. The wet compound leaves microscopic voids, bubbles, and dry spots inside the rim. If the firing pin strikes the one arc of rim where a void exists, there is nothing to ignite. The bang never comes. There is a second structural reason. To allow the firing pin to physically crush the rim from the outside, the brass wall at the rim must be extremely thin, typically 4 to 6 thousandths of an inch. That thinness imposes a hard ceiling on chamber pressure. The .22 long rifle caps at approximately 24,000 pounds per square inch. A modern centerfire rifle cartridge operates at 55,000 to 62,000 pounds per square inch. Push a rimfire into centerfire pressures, and the thin rim ruptures at ignition, venting superheated gas and brass fragments straight backward into the shooter's face. The pressure ceiling is not a design choice. It is a survival requirement. This inherent unreliability, roughly 1 malfunction per 1,000 rounds in premium match ammunition, 5 or more per 1,000 in bulk, is precisely why no serious instructor teaches the .22 long rifle as a primary defensive sidearm. It is a magnificent training cartridge, a superb small game tool, and a logistical miracle in its weight-to-shot count ratio. It is not a bet-your-life cartridge. The engineering will not permit it. And any marketer who tells a buyer otherwise is betraying the science that Hatcher and Sharp put on paper a century ago. Somewhere on the American internet tonight, a new .22 owner is buying a box of 60-grain Aguila Sniper Subsonic, loading it into a stock Ruger 1022, and watching the target 25 yards downrange fill with sideways tears instead of circles. The shooter will assume the rifle is defective. The rifle is not defective. The shooter has run headlong into gyroscopic stability theory, and the theory does not care about his opinion. The foundational work here belongs to Dr. Franklin W. Mann, the Massachusetts physician and amateur ballistician whose 1909 volume, The Bullet's Flight from Powder to Target, is considered the first quantitative study of external ballistics ever published in English. Mann built his own ballistic laboratory on his Milford farm, including a custom shooting rail called the V-Rest, and fired tens of thousands of experimental rounds across 4 decades to isolate the variables that govern bullet stability in flight. His conclusions, refined a century later by Harold Vaughn's rifle accuracy facts, remain non-negotiable law. Barrel twist rate. The rate at which the rifling rotates the bullet must be matched to the length of the projectile, not its weight. A bullet stabilizes in flight the way a gyroscope does. Rotational velocity resists tumbling. Too little spin, the projectile tumbles end over end. Too much spin, the projectile becomes overstabilized, and microscopic imperfections in the lead core fling the center of mass off the rotational axis, opening groups dramatically. The industry standard twist rate for .22 long rifle barrels is 1 turn in 16 inches. 1 full rotation for every 16 inches of bore travel. That rate is mathematically optimized for the classic 30 to 40 grain lead projectile. A 60 grain Aguila Sniper subsonic is dramatically longer. Through a 1 to 16 barrel, it does not spin fast enough to remain stable. It leaves the muzzle, destabilizes within 10 feet, and keyholes sideways into the target. To properly stabilize that projectile length, the shooter needs a 1 to 9 twist barrel, available as an aftermarket component from specialized rimfire smiths, typically at a cost of $400 to $600. But the sword cuts both ways. Push a 32 grain hypervelocity round through a 1 to 9 barrel, and the projectile spins so fast it overstabilizes. Group sizes widen measurably. The match-grade shooter who wants to run both heavy subsonic and light hypervelocity cannot compromise on twist rate without ruining accuracy with one load or the other. Most serious rimfire shooters choose the 1 to 16 and restrict themselves to appropriate projectile lengths. The physics will not negotiate. The barrel twist must match the bullet length, period. What the industry buried is that there is no universal rimfire barrel, no matter what the retailer promises. Every internet forum debate about bug-out rifle calibers eventually descends into the same tired argument. 5.56 NATO versus .308 Winchester versus 6.5 Creedmoor. Every one of those debates ignores the most ruthless calculation any infantryman has ever made about ammunition. The United States Marine Corps operates on a 3-word logistical proverb: ounces equal pounds, and pounds equal pain. Over a 20-mile forced march across broken terrain, every ounce of ammunition on the load-bearing harness becomes a liability measured in blisters, dehydration, and tactical mobility. A standard M2A1 ammunition can be loaded with 500 rounds of 5.56 NATO, weighs 14 to 16 pounds, and costs approximately $400 at current civilian pricing. A plastic brick of 500.22 long rifle rounds weighs roughly 3 pounds, fits in a cargo pocket, and costs under $30. The math is unforgiving. At the cost and weight of a single 500-round 5.56 can, a shooter can field over 6,500 rounds of .22 long rifle. In practical terms, a takedown .22 rifle, the Marlin Papoose, the Ruger 1022 takedown, the Henry AR-7, paired with 2 bricks of rimfire in a small backpack, provides the logistical capability to sustain a single adult on small game for a full calendar year at a combined weight under 10 pounds and a total ammunition cost under $70. No centerfire cartridge on Earth approaches that weight-to-shot count ratio. Not one. That logistical dominance, however, demands a skill tax that the centerfire world rarely encounters. Past 100 yards, the .22 long rifle ceases to be casual and becomes an advanced exterior ballistics problem. The modern authority here is Bryan Litz, the aerospace engineer turned applied ballistician whose published work on external ballistics, most notably the Applied Ballistics book series, is the mathematical foundation of every modern precision rifle program in the United States. Litz's wind deflection tables for the .22 long rifle make uncomfortable reading for anyone who believes the cartridge is easy. Because the .22 round is slow and light, it carries a terrible time of flight. Gravity and crosswind have a huge window to act on it. A 10-mile-per-hour full-value crosswind will barely nudge a heavy centerfire bullet at 200 yards. That same 10-mile-per-hour wind, acting on a standard velocity .22 long rifle, deflects the projectile nearly 19 inches off point of aim at 200 yards. Extend the shot to 300 yards, and the deflection opens to 39 inches, over 3 feet, while the bullet simultaneously drops more than 4.5 feet from the line of bore. Elite rimfire shooters, the NRL 22 competitors chasing half-inch steel at 300 yards, compensate with the 1-mile-per-hour bracket system, a memorized table of milliradian holdovers per single mile per hour of estimated wind. Hitting a 4-inch steel plate at 300 yards with a .22 long rifle is not luck. It demands the same mastery of mirage reading, wind flag interpretation, trigger break, and natural point of aim that a 1,000-yard .308 shot demands. The cartridge is cheap. The discipline it requires is not. Return to the archives of the Boone and Crockett Club. The record of the 1,000-pound grizzly, anchored with a single 29-grain lead bullet, is still there. The numbers have not changed. The physics have not moved. What has changed is the industry that surrounds the modern shooter. A market that sells $3,000 magnum rifles, $400 ammunition cans, and $1,100 ballistic optics to customers who have never mastered the fundamental cartridge the entire North American sporting tradition was built on. What the industry buried is not complicated. The .22 long rifle rewards geometry over energy, discipline over horsepower, patience over velocity. Its terminal ballistics tumble with lethal precision under the gelatin work of Dr. Martin Fackler and the forensic archives of Dr. Vincent DiMaio. Its internal ballistics cap at 18 inches of barrel under the chronograph of Julian and the laboratory mathematics of Harold Vaughn. Its external ballistics collapse through the transonic trap under the applied calculations of Bryan Litz. Its manufacturing limits and ignition flaws sit openly in the textbooks of Philip Sharp and Franklin Mann, where they have sat for a century, unread by the magnum consumer. Your grandfather knew this. Your great-grandfather knew this. Colonel Townsend Whelan knew it and wrote it. Theodore Roosevelt's Boone and Crockett conservationists documented it. Modern marketing simply decided that knowledge did not sell scope rings, and the generation raised on catalog copy forgot. The .22 long rifle strips away the technological crutches. It does not flatter trigger jerk. It does not forgive bad breathing. It does not correct for unread wind. It punishes poor fundamentals with visible misses on steel, and it rewards disciplined fundamentals with the quiet, devastating precision that has been anchoring game in North America since before the lever-action Winchester was a household name. Anyone holding a .22 long rifle tonight is not holding a toy. They are holding the single most honest diagnostic tool in the firearms world. The cartridge that made American riflemen, the inheritance the industry would like the next generation to trade in for a magnum upgrade at a 30-to-1 markup. The decision to load a rimfire round this weekend, walk out to the range, read the wind, feel the trigger, and learn the geometry of a small target at a long distance. That is not plinking. That is the deliberate refusal to forget what the magnum market has spent 40 years burying. That is an act of lineage. The HuntForge channel exists for the men and women who refuse that amnesia. The subscribe button below is not a social courtesy. It is a declaration that the old knowledge is not going silent on this generation's watch. It is a signature on the same register where Theodore Roosevelt's Boone and Crockett Club entered that grizzly skull 70 years ago. A register of riflemen who know that geometry, not marketing, is what actually drops game. Load up. Read the wind. Put one lead round nose exactly where it needs to go. And stand guard over a tradition that did not need $3,000 of aluminum and carbon to feed a continent. Next week on HuntForge, the industry-buried truth about the cartridge every modern hunter thinks they understand, but almost no one has actually tested against its closest competitor, and why the choice between those two rounds is not the one the marketing has been selling for 40 years. Forge your skills. Read the ground. Shoot straight.